Hey everybody, Hagrid here with the camera company, and today we're going to go over a very important topic, which is aiming to shoot in manual mode. For a lot of people, this can seem very daunting, totally understandable, but it's very important because even though your camera has auto features and auto modes and scene modes that are very good, they're never going to be as smart as you are. They're never going to have the thought process that you might have when you're on location looking at something. So while it might give you some decent photos and results, and it might make some situations easier because you don't have to focus on that, it's always going to be smarter to know what's happening under the hood and be able to make those decisions yourself for when the camera fails. Personally, I can't tell you the last time I shot in any auto mode, because once I learned how to do everything on my own, I didn't want to rely on the camera anymore. But we're going to go over three things: ISO, aperture, and shutter speed, in a little bit of detail to kind of help those along that don't know the way. So we'll start with shutter speed. Shutter speed, think of it as you're breaking down 1 second. Think of it as if your basic fractions. 1/1, 1/2, 1/4, and so forth. It's breaking down your seconds for the amount of time that your shutter is open, allowing light to come in. And it goes all the way to 8,000th, and it's slow as you holding the button down forever if you wanted it to. There are drawbacks and benefits of both sides, so you would want a shutter to be very slow and let in a lot of light if you're doing things like astrophotography, shooting stars. And you would want it a lot faster to not let in a lot of light and to stop motion quickly if you're doing things like sports, shooting football, baseball, basketball, that type of thing. And they both have attributes that will affect your images in different ways, but in the most basic aspect of what shutter speed is, it's how much light do you want to let in? Do you want to let in a lot? Then slow it down. If you want to let in just a little bit, then speed it up. Now let's move on to aperture. So that's built into your lens itself. Every lens will have a different aperture range. The most common will be like starting around 1.4, 1.8, 2.8, going all the way to f/22. Like I said, different lenses will vary in that range differently. We're just going to talk about prime lenses. So say you have a prime lens that goes down to 1.4, and we're shooting on that. The 1.4 lets in the most light on that lens can allow you to do. So it goes from 1.4 down to 22. 1.4 is a big hole, and 22 is a very small hole. Lets in very little light at 22. The other thing to keep in mind when you're shooting down at like the 1.4 portion of your lens, you're also shallowing your depth of field. I always put it into the words of how much of the world do you want in focus in front of you? 1.4 is a very small amount, 22 is a much larger amount. So the last thing is ISO. I think of ISO as something that kind of doesn't exist. You're adding it in after the fact in camera, because you're not giving yourself more sun and you're not opening a hole. You're just choosing the camera's sensitivity to your light. The more sensitive that your camera is, the more noise, the more grain you're going to see. So the higher your number, the more that you're going to notice it's actually lowering the quality of your picture because it's adding in grain, because the camera is having to find light to fake it where it's not actually there. So that's definitely a downside for a lot of people. Everyone has a different level of acceptable grain amount, but ideally we want a cleaner image, so we'll have our ISO as low as possible. Now each of these three items, shutter speed, ISO, and aperture, are on a three-way balance beam. So if you change your ISO, then either your aperture or your shutter speed need to change to rebalance that scale. And that scale is called your exposure triangle. Every picture is made out of these three items. Once you master your exposure triangle and you fully understand why you're choosing what setting, that's when you become a great photographer. Follow us for more tips.